How's it going, Martians? So, I have a rather strange video for you right now. I was answering a question about what I think is going to happen with the dollar as a result of the coming recession, as somebody asked whether or not I think that the dollar is going to be the catalyst, its hyperinflation is going to be the catalyst that drives the average Joe into digital assets. And I do, but I also said that, or was also trying to find an article showing that another alternative is for these federal cash notes that were recently circulating around Twitter, that the Fed's creating new denominations of the dollar. They're far different from what we're familiar with as what we know as the greenback, right? Well, I Googled Fed cash note trying to find the article here in the news, and I get this error on Google saying the selection and placement of stories on this page were determined automatically by a computer program. The time or date displayed reflects when an article was added to or updated in Google News. So I click, obviously, to repeat the search with standard options, not customized options. And then I get these pop-ups. So literally within the last 24 hours, an article from Dissident Voice saying, will the IMF Fed negative interest and digital money kill the dollar? And then we have this article. I don't know who Dissident Voice is, but MarketWatch has an article titled ECB's New Stimulus Helps Trump's Bid Against the Federal Reserve. And then further, we have a Bloomberg article saying ultra low rates are not a panacea for stock markets. And this was within the last 14 hours. Now, I had another article that's now removed, but thankfully I opened it here. So this one just posted on the 14th saying why the coming recession could force the Federal Reserve to swap greenbacks for digital dollars. So this article, again on MarketWatch, written by Chris Matthews, starts off, the Federal Reserve has never been more famous than it is today. It drew praise and ire for its handling of the financial crisis a decade ago, and the extraordinary measures it took subsequently to stimulate the U.S. economy have made it an important driver of financial markets. Meanwhile, President Trump has made its chairman, Jerome Powell, a household name by frequently criticizing the central bank's policies on Twitter and to the press. A movement, meanwhile, has been brewing among economists, financial service professionals, and central bankers to encourage a rethinking of the technology of currency. Those paper notes we carry in our wallets, with an eye towards issuing a digital currency. Some argue that could give central banks the tools necessary to break free of chronic deflation and persistently low or negative interest rates, while providing Americans a risk-free means to transact in a world where digital commerce constitutes a growing share of the economy. Gee, I really wonder what technology they could be talking about regarding currency, right? At any rate, the debate isn't about whether we need a digital currency. Michael Borden, an economist with the public policy think tank at Stanford University, told MarketWatch, it's about how you do it. In other words, the debate has moved away from whether or not we need a digital currency to, yes, we do need a digital currency. Now, how do we do it? And what isn't stated in this article is also the implied narrative based upon the current position of global economy of how do we do it rapidly and in a way that ensures the maximum chance of a successful transition. Now, before I read on in this article, I want to also just add the answer to that, my personal answer to this, not in the article. My answer is, you don't do it yourself, you adopt a well-tested, proven concept, right? Well, what's the greatest proof of concept in use actively by an institution today? There's only one, XRP, because Bitcoin's not being used by any institutions with any utility case. Only XRP is, with the second largest money transfer service in the world, MoneyGram. Americans already use digital currency for most of their purchases. In 2018, they used physical dollars for just 26% of transactions versus 62% with digital currencies, which includes credit cards, debit cards, and bank transfers, according to the Fed. So the central bank, or a central bank digital currency, CBDC as we all know, could work much like the mostly bank-issued digital money Americans use today, with some key differences. First, it would be backed by a full faith and credit of the United States government, and therefore risk-free. The local bank that manages your savings account could fail at any time, and the dollars in your account beyond those insured by the FDIC would disappear. A Fed e-dollar would persist as long as the US government does. More importantly, an e-dollar could pay interest. The idea that cash should pay interest dates back to monetary economist Milton Friedman, who argued that in 1966 that the most efficient monetary system would be one in which cash bears interest equal to that of short-term government bonds, to encourage greater use of the dollar. In good times, earning interest on your e-dollars would simply make everyone a little richer. But in times of crisis, it could also be used to institute negative interest rates, essentially a tax on holding cash. Such a policy would likely strike Americans as governmental overreach, but Bordeaux argued the alternative is worse. The current economic expansion is the longest in the U.S. history, but warning signs of recession are abound, including slowing economic growth and the recent inversion of the yield curve for U.S. government debt. In response, the Fed reduced interest rates in July and hinted at more cuts to come. But economists worry that the Fed will not have enough ammunition to fight the next downturn, as the central bank has typically had to cut interest rates by at least 5% points to stimulate the economy following a recession. The Fed may be forced to restart its program of quantitative easing, aka just printing dollars, or the purchase of long-term government debt to push down long-term interest rates, though there is growing concern that this is an ineffective tool because you're causing inflation by doing this. Take a look at Japan, which has been mired in a decade-long malaise. Interest rates have been stuck near zero for almost 20 years, despite a massive program of government bond buying that has led to the Bank of Japan's owning more than 40% of all Japanese government debt. The Eurozone hasn't fared much better despite imposing negative interest rates on large banks, as it's suffered 2 recessions since the financial crisis. So, ultimately, this article should emphasize, if nothing else, that this idea I've been presenting and many others in the space have been presenting over the course of the summer and all the way back to May, when we first even back to the beginning of this year, when we first started hearing about CBDCs. Now we're getting articles written by mainstream outlets talking about the Federal Reserve potentially replacing our dollars with a CBDC. So it's no longer fringe to speculate on this actually coming to pass. And the reality is this is most likely to come to pass far sooner than anyone really is ready for. And by that I mean, I don't think most people who are invested in XRP are ready for the returns that we're going to see when the United States economy, the Federal Reserve, creates a CBDC that, like every other CBDC that is being developed by almost every major economic power in the world, plugs in to the XRP decentralized ledger, and those currencies are then liquidated through the use of XRP as an intermediary for exchange of value between these currencies, as the ultimate solution to the Triffin's dilemma, which has facilitated the disintegration of cooperation between world powers for the whole of human civilization. Since there have ever been two human civilizations engaged in trade, war is the result of their inability to maintain fair and balanced trade between them on a level playing field, simply due to the means by which economies gravitate towards centralized means of valuation, such as what was a gold standard at one point, moved on to the US dollar, and will now move on to the blockchain. Right? So, this is wild, first off, that Google is blocking these kind of articles from me unless I remove the algorithmic filters that they use. But yeah, I'm glad that I persisted and found this article because it's very interesting. And it's also really interesting that this article is no longer being advertised to me either. I'm glad that I opened that in a second tab. I actually reloaded this to show you how it showed that, and thankfully it did block it again when I just searched it, and now it's not. But yeah, crazy stuff. So if you enjoyed this look at what I believe again to be the unfolding catalyst that will drive XRP and the digital asset ecosystem in general into the greatest bull run that will ever be known to the human species, because that's how massive this wealth transfer we are about to witness is going to be, well, be sure to hit that subscribe and ring that bell for future updates on where we're going. And to all my Martians out there, buckle up. I feel like Mars is just around the corner, so I can't wait to see all of y'all in my next video on Mars.